Yeah.
And that's what we're sending a kickback on the
Yeah.
fair.
Good. Yeah. Troy?
I have a question, and you probably answered this and I might have missed it, but exactly what age right now are we considering generation? What age range is generation Z?
It's up to early workforce or young workforce. So Joshua Johnson,
20s?
yeah, early 20s.
Early 20s.
Is what we would put that down to probably 8, 9, 10. So that's kind of the where we're at right there. What over things we discussed last week or material I sent out, what stood out to you about Gen Z? Anything else, Mike or Tom?
One of the things that strikes me, being in, obviously the oldest generation, is just the lack of personal contact
Okay.
between, each other. It's
Sure.
like everything's text or email
Yeah.
or something, to do with a tablet or a phone. And it's not as much one-on-one, let's go get a coffee anymore. It's, well, I'll text you and I'll do this. It might be right next to them.
Sure.
And,
Yeah.
when I talk to somebody in that generation, they can't, fathom,
Right.
that we had one phone in the house. And you had to.
Yeah.
And it's just, to them, it's beyond understanding, so they want to talk to somebody, they'll just text them.
Yeah.
And they can go on texting for hours and they could be, 2 feet from them.
Yeah.
So, that's what
Sure.
strikes me. It's just a different way of communicating.
So something I didn't get to, I was able to get to last week in that is that they want face-to-face interaction, especially with older generations. They don't know how to go about making that happen. It's something that really in communication is something in general that has to be coached. Good communication has to be coached anyways. There's an added layer of difficulty now because of the convenience of technological advancements, but they still want that, and they need some help figuring out how to do that. Gina had something real quick.
I know my daughter's 22,
Sure.
so I've been dealing with all this stuff and this texting, because I'm like you guys, I didn't grow up with it, and I asked them, why do you guys text? Why don't you just pick up the phone and talk to each other? I don't understand of it. They don't like the awkward pause. If there's a lull in the conversation, it gives them anxiety.
Yeah.
So they'd rather not be face to face, so they can take their moment to think about it, to respond or to not respond.
Yeah.
But they have a very hard time dealing face to face and looking eye to eye at people. If
Sure.
you notice kids.
Yeah.
And they have so much more anxiety these days. I mean, they don't realize that it's okay to have a lull in the conversation.
Sure. So, part of the reason for that and stuff we've discussed is just the pervasive stress and anxiety from things outside of their control. Talked last week about how there's a struggle being able to make decisions, right? Once again, it's just because of the world that they've grown up in. And so it's creating an internal anxiety that surfaces in a lot of areas. I saw Vanessa had.
Well, it's interesting because when I got home Sunday, Dib had no idea, what we had talked about, but he had one of his little epiphany moments where I'm half asleep and he comes in, I'm like, you awake? Yeah, sure, I'm awake. The lights are off. He always talks to me, he would die. He knew I was on. But the lights are off, but he started talking some about this. And it was really interesting. And I was like, what is it that where are you wanting? And he's senior. He'll be 18 in May. And he said, Mom, he said, I don't want a 9-to-5 job. I don't want to do the same thing every day and come home. He said, I want to see the world and have experiences. And having a big house or, mowing the grass every Saturday, it's not something I want to do. And I thought about it from that perspective, and I thought, he's seen this is kind of what my generation did. He was like, I know this sounds bad, but I don't want the big house and the white picket fence. He said, I want to see the world. I want to experience it. And I also think another, something positive about this generation is that they want to save the world.
They do. That's a
Yeah.
big part. That's exactly what it's.
Yeah, I mean, they want the recycling, they want the trees planted, they want us to be, to not utilize resources
Yeah.
so much. And I mean, I think from my generation back, we've just kind of taken everything for granted. And I think, yes, I know they're difficult. I have a 35-year-old, so I'm well aware of how difficult they are. But at the same time, I think there's positive things
Yes.
coming from this. It's just we have to find them and focus on that.
Yeah, that's a huge, they're crusaders. They want a cause to champion and to make happen, to create an architecture to help make that happen. And their struggle, and this is, we'll talk more about this today, but their struggle is, I'm not sure what to crusade. Talked about like this global, this open-mindedness where there's so many different thoughts and opinions out there, and everyone is so adamant that theirs is right. So it's difficult to figure, okay, so which is the right one, and how do I crusade that?
Right.
So yeah, Jack had his hand up.
Yeah, I think we need to be a little bit careful about overemphasizing technology
Okay.
with the current Gen Z group. After all, each one of us was in a generation.
Yeah.
And each new generation had new technology.
Yeah.
How many of us remember when TV came into being? How many of us ended up spending an unbelievable amount of time sitting there watching the big screen
Yeah.
or the little? On the big screen.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's, I don't want to chastise them too much for their use of the technology.
That we've created and given them.
Yeah, right, and, yeah, they're gonna use it, and we are not gonna particularly like it, because it wasn't like,
Sure.
it wasn't like what we had before, but nonetheless, we did experience
Yeah.
technology.
Yeah.
And the generation before us would probably not be happier with our, technology.
Yeah. I remember, but I know there was a time when comic books were the things that were melting your mind, right? Yeah. Troy, and then that's on Zach and.
Yeah, I want to underline what Gina was saying regarding communication. I noticed that when I walk in my classroom at school,
Yeah.
when on occasion we have time when they get to start their homework for 10 minutes or so before class is over with. I value that because it helps them to have me there when they have a problem. But when they call me over to help them, they have a hard, what they do is they point to the page or point to something on their paper that looks like chicken scratch to me, and I'm like, what number are you on? And they do it again, they won't help, and then I have to ask it again, what number are you on? And then they finally come out with the words to say, and these are advanced students, by the way.
Sure.
These are advanced students. And I've got to pry it out of them. What number are you on?
Yeah. Gotcha. Zach, what did you have?
Well, I know I wasn't here last week, but one thing I would say with with the Gen Z that's coming up, I think somewhat of a positive is that they're being fully taught in what we would call postmodernism, right?
Yeah.
Especially in higher ed.
Yeah.
Which I strongly disagree with a lot of assumptions of postmodernism, but one of the things that I think postmodernism has done and is doing is that it's challenging some of the assumptions of modernism that was extremely dangerous as well.
Sure.
But specifically out of postmodernism that I think is extremely positive that Christians can press into is the love of narrative.
Mm-hmm.
And
That's big, yeah.
And so narrative, and we have the best narrative there is,
Yeah.
right? We have creation, we have fall, we have the redemption of God's people through his son, Jesus Christ. And the Bible connects that amazingly. And so I think we have the best narrative, the most philosophically logical narrative.
Yeah.
That we can really share with the next generation that is being taught in that postmodern mindset.
Yeah, so excellent. We're gonna move on because you're jumping ahead of my class. Quick, yeah.
Technology is a blessing and a curse.
Yeah.
And it's
Yeah.
something we have to control.
Yeah.
One of the best books I've read recently is written by Heath, H-E-G-S, Heath, and there's some more after that. And he's a reporter on
Okay.
Fox, on Saturday. what's wrong and, there's, with education, how to get there, how do we get there,
Mhm.
and how do we solve it?
Sure.
So, I have an extra copy, because I bought 4 copies, guys. I have an extra one, if you like, take on, I'll be glad to give you one. But I was just thinking, there's really nothing new under the sun.
No.
Every generation
Yeah.
has had their horror for their children.
Yeah.
I remember growing up in middle class school, and I don't know about your family, Betty, but we were not allowed to watch Elvis.
Yeah. I'm sure. Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, we laugh about it.
Yeah.
But it wasn't funny.
No.
Christian there.
No. No. Yeah.
You know, and somehow or the other, we survived.
You did.
So how do we survive it? And
Yeah.
that's what I liked about Pete's book. He had some survival skills.
Sure.
He tells what he does, but I had, oh, the
Yeah.
wrong thing. He allows them 1 hour a day and he controls.
Yeah.
Here's control.
Yeah.
You got an hour, shit. I think that would drive kids crazy. But anyway,
yeah.
that's what he does.
Yeah. Controlling the narrative, which we're going to play in a little bit. I'm glad Zach brought that up. Because few core things that we need to see in Gen Z is mentioned they're crusaders. They want to make something happen. The good thing about technology is it's incredible what they're able to do and who they're able to reach with their phones, right? It's beyond anything any of us have ever been able to do before. So it's something to be leveraged. They have they're experts in it, right? They need to leverage their ability there. But they're in crisis, right? When you talk about how they've grown up in just constant and increasing crisis their entire life, and it's going to get probably worse in the next few years. And because of that crisis, because of the pluralism and the confusion and the postmodernism that's really hammered into them, they're looking for foundation. They're looking for stability. And drawing into a larger narrative is a big part of that. What we're going to talk about today is a target for our arrows. And it's, so go to Psalm 127, 3-5. We're going to be here for a couple minutes, and we're going to look at a couple other famous verses, hopefully. Psalm 127, 3-5. I think I said before, this is probably my favorite verse. And it comes, my attention was drawn to it by a book we're going to talk some about this morning called Romancing Your Child's Heart by Monty Swan. I highly recommend it. What we're talking about today is in our raising, and when I say raising, I mean grandparenting, mentoring, parenting even. What is our goal? What is the target? Because Psalm 127, 3-5 reads, "Behold, children are a heritage from the Lord, the fruit of the womb a reward. Like arrows in the hand of a warrior are the children of one's youth. Blessed is the man who fills his quiver with them. He shall not be put to shame when he speaks with his enemies in the gate." I love this comparison of children to arrows for multiple reasons. One is, especially in those days, I think I mentioned this, making an arrow wasn't a simple thing. It required a lot of attention to detail and focused work, diligent work to create something like that. And to create something that was effectively going to fly straight from the bow, right? Not just kind of the point is not just to get it out there, but to actually aim at something and hit the target with that arrow. So there's this idea of the crafting, the diligent work in shaping this arrow, but also the idea of needs to be an intended target, right? And that's what I want to talk about today. Is like, what is our target? What target do we have for our arrows? And so this question comes to my mind, like, are we raising rule followers or are we raising Christ followers? Because we can raise a rule follower and then not know anything about God. I think I mentioned this. We can raise someone who knows the Bible but doesn't have a relationship with Jesus. He doesn't have a saving relationship with Jesus. Does that make sense? You following me there? It's important for us. We need this to be biblically based. That's what the Shema is all about, right? Being biblically based. We have to be Jesus centered, right? If we're not guiding, if our target isn't Jesus, we're failing our young people. We're not giving them what they need. Like, I don't think any of us would disagree with that. And so the question is, what does that look like? What do we mean by that? And that's where Romancing Your Child's Heart comes in by Monty Swan. Once again, excellent book. He starts out with the context of there's a battle for the hearts of our young people. There's a battle constantly happening for the hearts of our young people. And Satan is trying to pull them over to his side. And if we're not doing anything about it, then he's going to win. So we have to, whether we want to or not, we've got to be engaged in this fight. And whenever I say we, I mean all of us, from parents to grandparents to people who never had kids but love kids, to people who raise their kids and grandkids and are on the later stages of life. It's the Shema talks to the community of raising their young people. All of us are in the fight for the heart of our young people. And the goal is to romance their hearts to God, right? Jesus is the target. God is the target. We're aiming there. And the idea of romancing to God is interesting because the proverb writer in Proverbs 9 and in a couple other places, he depicts wisdom and folly as women, right? Who are trying to, there's the Lady Wisdom who's encouraging people to come and feast in her banquet halls, right? And then there's the seductress, the Lady Folly, who's trying to lure people away into sensuality and destruction. And both of them are playing a game of, they're playing a romantic game, right? They're trying to romance people to their side. And that's we've got to be in this competition for romancing our children's heart. So how does it work? Proverbs chapter 22, verse 6 is a famous one. We're gonna look at that. We're gonna camp there for a long time. And Larry mentioned this a couple of weeks ago, because this verse is big. I've seen it break parents. If you know it, it's a pretty simple one. Proverbs chapter 22 and verse 6. I'm just gonna have someone read that for us because it's pretty simple.
Did you say 122?
Proverbs 22.
Start children off on the way they should go, and even when they are old, they will not turn from it.
Yeah. Train up a child in the way you should go, or start children off. How many of you have ever felt hurt by this verse? You don't have to raise your hand, but I know people who have, right? And it's painful because and we sometimes read Proverbs and we think, oh, this is like a hard and fast rule and promise. That's not the point. It's yeah.
I'm sorry for interrupting. Go ahead.
Go ahead.
Well, yes, to answer your question, and I have seen people who have questioned this because their children, went off into the world and didn't follow God. But one response to that is, it says, train up a child the way he should go, and when he is old, he will not depart.
Yeah.
I think it is a indication that if you do train them up the way they should go, they at least know how to get back to where they were.
Yeah.
There is a tendency, hopefully, that after life beats them up, that they will realize,
Sure.
like the prodigal son, that they need to come back to where they were.
Yeah, exactly. Larry.
To tag on to a point you made earlier about being rule followers versus Christ followers.
Yeah.
There is a lot of training for rule followers.
Yeah.
And it's important to recognize that that's not what this verse is talking about when it's talking about raising up a child the way it should go. He's talking about being a follower of God.
Yeah.
And if a parent just kind of beats the rules over the head, if you will, That's not what this verse is talking about. And there, that type of a raising may actually push a child away from God.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Right. We're not. Yeah, I appreciate that. I don't have anything to add to that. Something interesting about this verse, the Hebrew. There's been a lot of people who like look at the Hebrew, and Hebrew is one of those great languages where we kind of know what the word means, but we don't always know exactly what the word means. It's really confusing. The Hebrew word here for train up had this idea in the Hebrew culture of when a baby was born, the midwives would actually dip their finger in like crushed dates, get like some of the juice off of dates or some fruit or something, and they'd stick it on the roof of the child's mouth to get it to start suckling, right? And then give it to the mother to start nursing. And so the idea is literally to create a hunger, create a thirst for something, right? And so he says to create thirst in the child for the way they should go. And so, and this is an interesting thing. So we're creating thirst in the way they should go. So where does the way that they should go? It's not the way that we want them to go, right? Gina.
This may be a little abstract or around the way, but listening to you talk, what I can tell you about me as a parent, me as a Christian, and how I relate to my children and bringing God into their lives. And it's, our responsibility. And I was always just a believer because my parents were, and I was Catholic, and, I told my kids, yes, this is the way it is. We didn't read the Bible. Grammy and Grandpa, are believers. God is good, we go there. I didn't have a Christian family in the sense that, like my parents did, but I didn't have fellow family members like I do here. So it was kind of hard for me to be a leader in that.
Sure.
I did have special encounters with God and stuff, and my faith grew and grew and grew. But until I reached this church, my children didn't see the love I had for a church and a church family. And that's a big difference.
Yeah.
Because I almost got my son to commit to come one day because I talked so highly of this church and how wonderful and simple it is. And simple is good because I've been to the fancy thrills and you don't get that feeling as you do in a smaller place. And now I can really bring Jesus to my kids.
Cool. Awesome. Yeah. Support from a faith community in doing this is big, right? We're all responsible for helping create that thirst. Yeah, Kim.
I think the simplest way to boil it all down is Proverbs 6, 20 and 21, basically the man designed the word of God in their heart.
Yeah.
And that's them around their neck, and we don't have to talk about it. But I remember by the time my kids were 3, they knew the Lord's Prayer, they knew the Psalms 23, and I think it was another that I called the Naked Bed, and they knew it by heart. And I don't know what they're doing now because both of them are kind of off in their thing, but that's something that's big with me. Start with simple things like Luke 21, 137. Anyway, it don't have to be long extended verses, but if we start now with, I think, Bible memorization.
Yeah.
That kind of thing. Talk about a little bit here, maybe in the car,
Yeah.
that kind of stuff. I think it is there. And so there'll be times when they'll be able to go back and read what mom and dad are saying in God's word versus what's out there.
Sure.
And I think that's really a good time.
Yeah. Yeah. So that's the Shema, right? Of like talking about it when you walk by the way and when you lie down, when you rise up, right? It's that constant conversation and doing it in such a way that we're creating this thirst, this hunger for more of God, more of Jesus, not something that is working against them or defeating them, beating them back, but drawing them closer to Him. Yeah, go ahead.
That is along with the education part.
training to me is that faith in action like in James.
Yes, yeah,
So it's training them, taking them, showing them, doing with them, that whole process.
yes, yeah,
Um, that's-
yeah, it's a big part of it. Vanessa, and then we need to,
I'll
You're good.
finish. Mine just says direct
okay,
children. And in my notes, I have direct, not force.
yeah,
So we point the way, we
Exactly.
walk the way, we head that way, and
Right.
hope they follow. But ultimately, it's their decision.
yeah, yeah, it is, it is. That's why I like this, the create thirst, create hunger is it's not something that's forced, it's something that's encouraged or like nurtured into happening, right? And then the way they should go, and once again, this isn't it's not the way that we want, but the way that is purposed for them. Does that make sense? Sometimes, sometimes we think, oh, I want my kid to be this, and we like pour so much into like making them be this thing, and that's not at all what they want to be, right? That's not all what they're driven or created to be. They're created for something else. So everybody has a place in the church that's unique to them, and they can invest or build it up in their own way. It's important to be good students of our young people, right? Does that make sense? To learn them, to learn their hearts, to see what they're inclined to. Tom.
I think kids today are looking for consistency
Yes.
and example.
Yeah.
And if we can provide the example and the consistency in our beliefs, whatever those beliefs are, the kids will follow those.
Yeah.
Okay. And today, in my coaching experience and in my mentoring experience, I find that too many parents talk at their kids
Mm.
and not with their kids.
Yes. Yeah.
And that's the problem that I see.
Yeah.
Kids are not taught with, they're taught at.
Yes.
And so they're told, here's what you have to do, here's what you have to do, here's what you have to do. And what happens is, and you and I talked about this earlier this week, kids have a tendency to make decisions through a consensus
Mhm.
of their friends' thoughts.
Sure. Mhm.
Okay?
Yeah.
Rather than being thinkers on their own.
Right.
And so, and that's what we have to teach our kids.
Yeah.
And, when I was growing up, and that was a million years ago, I know. But when I was growing up, if I got home at 4 o'clock in the morning on a Saturday morning, I knew at 7 o'clock, my dad was gonna walk in my bedroom and say, Bub, get up, it's time to go to church. Okay? No matter how I felt, he never raised his voice, but he said, it's time to go to church. And we went to church.
Yeah.
Okay? And Sunday night, we went to church. And Wednesday night, we went to church. And so there was an example in my home that God was first.
Mhm.
Okay? And so kids follow example. Kids follow a consistency.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially like, someone mentioned at the beginning of class with Gen Z, they're looking for stability, right? And the competition or the struggle we have, the line we have to walk is how do we give them stability and a grounding, a foundation that makes sense with the world they're living. Sometimes I think we try to teach Christianity and as if it doesn't have any relationship to the rest of life. Does that make sense? Whenever if we're putting Christ at the center and drawing Christ, we have this example of what a godly lifestyle looks like in the world, lived amongst people of the world, right? And how to hold on to that. So drawing them to Christ, right? That an example there, the ultimate example is important. And in figuring out that line of how are we in the world? How are we Christians, but living in a world that doesn't think like we do, especially nowadays, you know, like, yeah, Tom, and then we need to.
Are there examples that we could come up with to, suggestions for how parents can do this today? I look
Yeah.
at, there's something that I wish I had done.
Yeah.
That I did not do. My kids were in church every Sunday, and I'm like, Pete, in his book on education, Sunday school is not gonna do it.
Sure. Yeah.
I wish I had done a big banner in their bedroom door that they had to pass out every morning.
Mm-hmm.
I would put on it, what would Jesus do?
Sure.
So they have to think about it. Now, I don't know if it's working, I've never done it. But it's just a thought, you know, the kids go out into a world and it's not the world they see at home.
Right. Yeah, exactly.
And so how do we keep it on their mind when they go out?
Yeah.
Uh,
That's, yeah.
Just to tag on that, we need to make sure that our kids are seeing in us that we are thinking what would Jesus do.
Yes.
We're not telling them, they need to see us living it. And if we're not, we're confused, we have questions,
Mm-hmm.
then what happened with them?
Exactly.
We need to remember the devil is a liar.
Right.
And he's using other people, he's trying to make our kids look out there and see the pastors clean up each other's side.
That's exactly it. He's trying to say, this is good, this is better than what you've been offered.
You look at your mom and dad, are they following you?
Sure. Yeah. Yeah, that's exactly it. Young people, they're not going to do what we're not doing. Like, they're going to do what we do.
You can't give them what you don't have.
Exactly. Especially with Gen Z, where they're collaborators. They want to do things with people. They have. You look at like the polls and information we got last week, and some that I sent out to some of you. Like, they want to work with older generations in doing the work of Jesus. They want to do that. It's up to us to take those steps to bring them along, and for us to initiate, how do we bring justice to the homeless person? How do we help them? How do we help just the people who are in need? How do we help the sick? How do we treat people? They want to see how our young people are so observant, right? And they can see, like, well, this is how Jesus treated people. We need to treat people like that. And if we're not doing it ourselves, that creates a lot of confusion as to, like, well, does it really matter to you then? And then should it really matter to me? They're observant in that. They want to follow that.
Because of what's really important here is they need to know Jesus.
Exactly.
And if they don't know Jesus, it's going to be really hard to convince them to do
Right.
what Jesus
Right.
would do.
Good. All right, we came back around. Let's keep going. So Proverbs 22, 6. The way he should go. We should be students of our children, learning what their bents are, what they are have a propensity towards, and help them seek that into, as Zach mentioned earlier, the larger story. Young kids especially, but all of us. I mean, I'm still a movie person. Like, I'm a big narrative person. Like, I don't know if I've ever said this in front of a crowd before, but I love Lord of the Rings. I absolutely love it. And it's because of the narrative, the story that's crafted. And you look at Jesus's teaching, and it's all story, right? Because you can look and you can say, oh, I can see how God's working in this story. And then you help your young people see their lives in the scheme of this larger story of, like, Christ died for you, he redeemed you, he reconciled you so that you may continue on this big story, right? Help them see their lives in the picture of a larger story, not just, well, we got to make sure I do everything right before I can go to heaven, but, like, Christ has redeemed me for a purpose in this story. The trap.
We all want to have purpose.
Yeah, everyone wants purpose. Everyone wants
Everyone
belonging.
wants to feel like that there's, what they do is meaningful.
Exactly.
Has an impact or something.
Yeah, exactly.
On that note, I've noticed that a lot of the things that you have brought up that the children need, we need.
Yeah. Yeah.
They need, there's a battle going on. Well, we were in a battle too.
Yeah.
You know, and if we don't see, we've got to make that connection. We're in the middle of it also.
Yeah. Right on. The next part of romancing our child's heart is bringing. Hold on. Ephesians 6. Let's go to Ephesians 6 real quick. Bringing Christ into view, and then I'll try to wrap this up real fast. Ephesians chapter 6. What's important about Ephesians 6 is to look back at Ephesians 5 before Paul starts talking about all these relationships, but husband and wife, parent and child, employer, employee. Verse 21 is the command to, chapter 5, verse 21 is the command to submit to one another out of reverence for Christ. And that command continues on when we get down to chapter 6 and verse 4, where it says, fathers, do not provoke your children to anger, but bring them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Once again, there's a lot of Greek ideas carried in those verses that don't translate perfectly to English. You may have heard how, do not provoke them to anger. It could be exasperate or frustrate. The idea is working against them. It's that idea of we're creating thirst, not beating them into a box, right? We're drawing something out. We're not trying to put them into something. Does that make sense? We're not trying to structure them into a jail. But this is important because our children's experiences with us, especially fathers and Christian men, shape our young people's image of God. Like, that's a huge thing. Our young people's experience with adults, particularly men, shape their view of God the Father. And so how we interact with them is helps them get that first picture of what God is like. And if it's a bad picture, it may surprise you to find out they're not going to like God. But raise them, and raise them has an interesting. So raise them up in the discipline and instruction. So discipline can mean the handiwork. So raise them up in the handiwork of Christ. I think that's interesting. And I'm not sure how exactly to see that, either meaning entrust them to the handiwork of Christ, raise them up and trusting them to Christ's work in them. I mean, I'm so grateful that we do this prayer partner thing, and we have people come and pick kids to pray for, or have people come and pick kids to pray for the school year. Naomi got a letter from Juan and Rebecca yesterday, and she thought it was really cool. I was out working in the yard or something. I didn't see it. Whenever I came in, she had run over to me with it. I'm like, I got this card. It was so cool. And I love that. I love to see that my kids are invested in by people other than just myself, people in the faith community. And so that prayer is continuing from the faith community, is continuing to pray Christ work in the life of this kid. Help them to come to know you. It also means just raise them as Christ raises us. If you think about it, how has Christ dealt with each and every single one of us? And it's only in love and grace and gentleness. Correction when we needed it, but still with grace. So raise them up in the discipline and instruction of the Lord. Instruction is interesting. Noutheteo is the Greek root word. And it literally means to remind or to be brought to mind. And I think so. Raise them up in the bringing of mind of the Lord. So in our instruction, in our raising, he's what's in saying, bring Christ to the center. Whatever it is, Christ needs to be at the center. Discipline needs to be Christ focused, right? It's not just, hey, you broke a rule, I'm mad at you. Discipline, right? It's we got to get back onto the Christ path, right? We got to get back focused on Christ and doing what Christ would do, bring Christ into those moments. They keep ringing the bell at me, so I got a minute still. All that, we've talked this before, you have to be serious about your faith. The Shema starts with, you shall love the Lord your God with all your whole heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then teach these things to your children. If we don't have love for God, if we're not pursuing God, it's not going to matter what we're teaching our kids.
100% right.
Step into their world. Romancing your child's heart he talks a whole chapter about just be a kid with your kids sometimes. And that goes for the old of us to the youngest, oldest of us to the youngest of us. Take time to step into their world, to see life through their eyes. Encourage a sense of wonder. Finn does this thing where everything is, oh, wow. Like, it doesn't matter what it is. He just like, it's something new. And it's, oh, wow. He's just excited about it. And I want to capitalize on that. And anytime that it happens, I say, especially like with nature or things that happen that are like science or whatever, it's like, and God did that, right? God makes that happen, you know? And this sense of wonder and awe at God's working is a big deal. And draw out their creative image. That's a big thing. What are they, once again, what are their propensities? What are they drawn to? And how do you draw that out in a way that can reveal or reflect God or draw them closer to God? Hey, you're a great athlete. God has given you some great ability. He's crafted you in some ways that are incredible. You're so intelligent, man. God has given you such a keen mind. I wonder what you can do for God with that. You know, Naomi is creative. We can put her down with some crayons and paint and paper, and for the most part, just leave her alone for a while. And she's really good at it. You know, man, God gave you the ability to do that. What can you do for God in that? We're going to start talking more in depth about all this, but there's some ideas, some practical applications as to how to do that, things that in your family, not even just your family, maybe just with the young people that you have influence on. How do you go about these ways that bring Christ to the center of the conversation, of the event, of whatever is happening? How do you seize these moments to make Christ the center? So you have your homework. That's the homework, is to look at some of those practical applications.
Are you sending this to us?
It's all on the paper, the handout. Pray about it. Think about your own faith. Think about your own story. How can you share your story with your young people in such a way that they can see how God is working and help them to relate their story to God's larger story? I think about how practical ways to implement these things. We're going to talk a lot more practical going ahead of us. Next week's going to be a very heavily discussion based, so I'm excited about that. I really appreciate y'all hanging in there with me through all of this. I appreciate your attention. Once again, if you want these slides or anything, we can do that. This was recorded despite all of our internet struggles this week. Technology.
Thank you.
Lightning hurts the building. All right. I'm gonna say a prayer and we're done. Father, thank you for today, and thank you for our time together this morning. Father, help us to first of all pursue you with all of our heart, soul, strength, and mind, Lord, and may we bring children to be focused on you. May we bring young people to where may we bring you to the forefront of the mind of our young people. They may see you, they may focus on you, they may desire more of you, they may be hungry and thirsty for righteousness. Father, Lord, just help us to see ways that we can practically implement all of these things in our day-to-day walks. And Lord, we just pray that you empower us and guide us by your Spirit. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.